Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe, and I'm really excited to welcome Trey R today. Trey's been sober since October 18th, 2019, is coming up on 5 years in recovery and continues to grow in both life and sobriety. He's been married for 3 years, and his wife is also in the program, a true recovery power couple. While they don't have kids yet, they share their home with their beloved Frenchie, Hank. Trey is a creative spirit who enjoys painting, writing, and skateboarding, always finding new ways to express himself and stay grounded. So grab a cup of coffee, relax, and let's get into it. How you doing today, Trey?
I'm doing great. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, man. I'm doing pretty good. It's a beautiful day. And so what was it like growing up, Trey?
It was kind of awkward. So, when you hear a lot of people's stories and they talk about not feeling like they fit in, my real name is Tracy. In fact, I'm a junior. Tracy Shannon is my first and middle name. So the way it worked out was my dad was dead set on me being named after him. My mom was like, he's going to get bullied and beat up with two girl names. So they were like, we'll call him Trey. That was the compromise. And everyone else I've ever met that's Trey is a third. And so it's a weird conversation to have. But, of course, it's still, with kids, you get made fun of. And, I was really big as a kid. So I was like lunch tray. And then like I was a heavy smoker, like from high school on. So I was like ashtray. Yeah, it was just how it is. So, but yeah.
I had to say a similar issue with being Joe. It was always, Joe Schmo, and I was like, but I'm glad you clarified the Trey because I did think you were a third, and I was going to ask you about that. So,
yeah.
So where'd you grow up, Trey?
So I'm currently living in Noonan, Georgia, and that's where I grew up. I was born in a little town called LaGrange, and then we moved to Noonan when I was like 1. And that's about 30 miles south of Atlanta. It was a really small town when I was growing up. Now we've got movie theaters and a ton of shopping. Like where the biggest shopping plaza is in Noonan is where I used to go camping as a kid. It was all
wow.
So I was a little bit sheltered because obviously this is pre internet was just coming in, and we lived out in the country, didn't have cable. So I was fairly sheltered growing up and kind of starving for finding more things out there. So I was, always at the music stores and like Blockbuster and all the video shops trying to broaden my horizons off of the 4 channels we got. So, but it was it was good growing up. I grew up in the church, actually, which now I'm not religious at all, but that was something that I was really involved in all through even high school and college. Like I was really involved in youth group. In college, I did Bible studies and taught Sunday school when I wasn't too drunk to make it to church. There was one time I actually was supposed to teach Sunday school, and I woke up in someone's yard that morning after a football game, and I had to walk to my car at my fraternity house, and I had to walk past the church, and it just happened to be right at noon when they were letting out. And that was a fun little experience. So it was, basically just all about church and school growing up until I just discovered skateboarding at a really young age. And that's kind of always been with me since then. Not that there was a lot of places to skateboard in Noonan. I had a little 20 by 20 concrete pad at the house, and that was about it. But my parents would, now there's a skate park in Noonan that I love. But growing up, my parents, were awesome. And they would take me up to Woodstock, which is like over 2 hours away. There's only a skate park around in Georgia. And, let me skate around for a whole day, like once every couple of months. So, they were, my mom was always really supportive of all the stuff I did.
That's pretty cool. What were there any like what were kind of your earliest memories of like alcohol or anything like or drugs or I'm not sure, either way like was any did you have any experiences early on with that or any attitude towards it?
Um, yeah. So one of the things that I loved growing up was like Twilight Zone, like the old Twilight Zone episodes, and those old shows and movies where everybody's drinking and smoking cigarettes, and it just seems really cool. And my grandfather, who actually, when he passed, had over 25 years of sobriety. I remember going to his house, and now looking back, I can tell he was in AA and she was in Al-Anon because all they did was smoke cigarettes and drink coffee and house all my derelict cousins and uncles all the time. It was just everybody stayed there. And so that, I kind of glorified that. And my dad, who, my parents got divorced when I was 1 because of my dad's drinking. And I remember when I think I must have been in maybe 6th or 7th grade, I was staying with him and he would go to sleep and then I would just drink his Budweisers and smoke his cigarettes just by myself, just, to see what it was all about. And I don't really remember a lot about, that experience as far as like it being that revelation, that aha moment. But I think once I started, like I said, I'm huge into film. So, growing up, I loved, Animal House. I was like, that's going to be my college experience, and like Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And when I discovered Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas with the book and then the movie, it was on. Like I was like, that's how I want my life to be. And what's funny is I don't really remember a lot about early drinking, but the first time I smoked pot, I remember it was like the biggest revelation ever to me. And I think it was easier to get than alcohol when you're a kid. And it did something for me. Like it was the Thursday night before the last week of school, my freshman year of high school, when I discovered that. And then once I hit that, that's all I wanted. Because looking back, I realized that I was looking for that ease and comfort, that comes with altering the way that I, think and feel. Because looking back, I've been full of fear since I was a little kid, with no real discernible reason. Like I said, my parents were divorced when I was 1, so I never knew them together. In fact, I remember I had a friend whose parents were still together, and I was like, "That's weird. They are. They're still married." I thought all parents were. But my dad, like when he would bring me home, it'd be like Sunday nights, and he lived in Marietta when I was like about an hour and a half away when I was little. And then when I got into middle school and high school, we lived in Nashville, in Goodlettsville, actually, right outside of Nashville. And he would drive down, pick me up, drive me up to Nashville and drive me back Sunday night. And on Sunday nights, I'd be afraid to fall asleep in the car because I was like, I think he's going to just drop me off in the middle of nowhere and leave me. Like, we never threatened that. I just thought that in my head. And my mom, whenever I'd be like at a store, like I remember being at a grocery store and, went down a different aisle than her, and then I couldn't find her. And my first instinct was I ran out to the parking lot to the car so that if she was trying to ditch me, I could cut her off and get her. It's like she was a loving, wonderful mom and never, again, never threatened to leave me. But that's just the fear that I had ever since I was a kid. And I always had that anxiety and never felt like I fit in. I think part of that was being like, really overweight as a kid. And, that's, I think, why, with what was it? Animal House, like John Belushi, like Chris Farley, like those were like my heroes, like the overweight, comedians. And that's when I became the class clown. Like that's, if you're laughing at me, at least, we're having fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like any bad attention is as good as good attention. But, once I discovered, marijuana, and then shortly after that, I started finding ways to drink alcohol. I remember, I think it was probably around like whenever I started driving around 16, I was drinking all the time and drinking alone. Like I wasn't drinking socially. I'd come home and I remember talking about the internet, like back when you have dial up, and I would, buy a case of beer, which is ridiculous for a 16-year-old, and then I'd sneak it into my golf bag. And then I would drink beer and try to look at porn on the internet, but, I'd pass out before the first picture loaded. Like on a school night, like that was just sort of what I did. And I always, wanted to party as much as possible. And I wanted to be the life of the party and act ridiculous. And I got alcohol poisoning for the first time when I was 17. And, looking back, it was kind of one of those alcoholic moments where we're drinking beer in my friend's basement. And I get the bright idea, hey, let's raid your dad's liquor cabinet and, take a bottle of scotch and then drink it all. And I drank me and him drank the whole bottle, and I got alcohol poisoning. And his mom actually found me on my back, like asphyxiating because I'd vomited.
Oh, wow.
And she like rolled me over and cleaned me up. And the next morning I was supposed to go to church with my mom. Like I said, I grew up in church, and I thought that if I didn't go to church, it would be more suspect than, going reeking of booze. And I went, and she immediately smelled it on me. I threw up all over the church, went home, got grounded. My girlfriend had called me. This is pre-cell phone. So she called the house, and my mom's like, well, Trey can't come to the phone because he started to get drunk last night, and, he's grounded. Of course, my girlfriend's like, what was he doing last night that, I didn't know about? So I'm in trouble with my parents and my girlfriend. And all I got out of that was don't drink scotch. Like, that's the problem. And I still it took me a while before I could drink liquor again without being ill. But, looking back, like I had to have something to change the way I, think and feel. So I'm smoking a lot of pot and I'm drinking a lot of beer. And, this is back when Mike's Hard Lemonade and like those kind of things were coming in, and I could stomach those. And it's like, looking back, like I just had to feel different and had to numb out. Because I just didn't like being me. I couldn't stand my own skin. And it was like that for a long time. And I didn't realize that until I started drinking and using and just chasing that completely. And I used that as an excuse. Like I said, Hunter Thompson was like a big influence on me from an early age. And, I just thought like, okay. And I remember in the big book when it talks about, doctors telling us that, we're in full flight from reality or complete mental defectives. I remember telling a psychiatrist once, like, if you looked at life the way I did, you'd have to be messed up too. Like, it's just too boring and dull, and I can't stand it unless I'm on something. And, and I thought, it gives me a challenge too. So if I can accomplish something while I'm high or drunk, then all the better. And that was just my mentality for a long time. And I remember in college, it got way worse, and I started doing cocaine. Like, I remember the first time I did it, I lied to my friends about having done it because I was already crazy as it was, and they didn't want to be responsible for me doing, cocaine for the first time with them. And so I'm like, yeah, I've done it. And then I went back, I remember 30 days straight to the same guy to buy it. And he's like, you have a problem. And I'm like, I think you're the one with the problem. Like, I'm your best customer and you're trying to stop me. And that was my fraternity, actually. So to back up a little bit, when I'd gotten alcohol poisoning senior year of high school, and like I said, I was really involved in the church, and I was talking to my youth minister, who I'd actually butt dialed while I was buying weed one time. And so he kind of knew what I was getting into. And, he told me, he's like, when you go to college, like once you leave home, if you don't kind of get yourself straightened out and stay, on the right side of things, it's a lot harder. And so I sort of took that to heart and joined a Christian fraternity. I was like, I had to be in a fraternity like Animal House. The Christian fraternity, after a year, I got kicked out of that for breaking every rule they had, and just not acting like a good Christian. And so then I joined a real fraternity, like an Animal House fraternity, that literally we treated like the house was, it looked worse than the one in the movie Animal House. And just to give an example, like I had a guy that fell out that had the room next to me in the house. And one night I decided to make a Beetlejuice door between the two walls, like the cinder block walls. I broke them down and made like a giant suite. And they weren't very happy about that at all. And those were just the stupid things that I did. And I remember running for president of the fraternity, and they just straight up told me, we can't let you be president of this fraternity because you're going to turn into a drug den. And I'm like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And they're like, well, you're high right now. And my excuse was, well, I didn't get high in the house. I was outside. And that's just, people trying to look after me, even these people that I party with, right? This is when I first start seeing that I'm going a little bit more extreme than others, but I just view it as they don't get it. They don't party like I do. And I often joke with a friend of mine that we used to do a lot of cocaine together, and we'd, stay up till the morning hours, and we would yell at the runners that would get up before dawn and run in front of the house. And I'd be so angry at them. And he's one of those guys that, can drink and do a little bit and then just put it down and then he's good. And I never was that guy. But I remember calling him after I'd gotten sober and I started running, and I'd run early in the morning, and I'd call him and be like, now I became the guy that I used to yell at all the time. It's kind of ironic how that works out. But the fraternity tried to give me an intervention. That didn't work. Obviously, like I think through college, there were certain times when I stopped drinking for a little bit. I don't know if it was like, I don't necessarily remember like the precursor. I just remember those periods of like white knuckling it, going to the bar because I don't know how to do anything else but, go to a bar to be social, and drink club sodas with lime so people don't realize that I'm not drinking. And, I used to joke that I'd wake up often, sore, confused, and single. And usually I'd piss off a girlfriend, get into a fight, and, not know what was going on. And I just thought that was normal college stuff. And after college, the summer after I graduated, I stayed and I went to Alabama for undergrad. So don't fault me too bad for that. It was during the Shula years, so you can't really say it wasn't exactly a good time. But anyway, so my senior year, I meet this girl, and she becomes the love of my life. And the reason I fall in love with her is because she knows all the stuff I'm doing. I met her through her boyfriend at the time, who was one of my fraternity brothers who I was doing cocaine with. And I remember he was yelling at her for smoking pot, and, just it was such a functional relationship. And so I rescue her, obviously. And, ask her to marry me right after college. And then that went downhill quickly. Like, we got married my first year of law school and divorced my third year of law school. And part of that, it was all my drinking. And she expected, I remember she was like, we graduated, we're adults, we're supposed to grow up. And I'm like, yeah, that means we have real jobs and we can afford to party whenever we want. We don't, we can stay out as late as we want and do all that. And she just wasn't really down with that. And I remember when we separated, so I was a really big like hippie in college and afterwards. And I didn't get into law school immediately after college. So I took a year off and I worked at a law firm, but most of what I did was follow the band Widespread Panic around on tour, to a point where I almost didn't go to law school and was going to just make t-shirts and sell grilled cheeses in the parking lot and make a living that way. My parents are very grateful I didn't end up that route. But anyways, I say that we were at a Widespread Panic show. And at this point, my drinking has progressed where I drink every single day. And my wife and I are getting in arguments. Like I go to make a gin and tonic and she just, kind of rolls her eyes. And I think, and I would argue with her, like, your attitude is why we're having a bad time. It's not because of my drinking. And looking back, like with my mom divorcing my dad because of his alcoholism, I remember her saying that she used to get really upset when they'd be at dinner and he'd have a beer, and she knew that he would have, if he had one beer, he was going to have 20. and he couldn't control it. And looking back, like I did the exact same thing with my first wife. And so she's kind of going off on me about the drinking. So I'm trying to figure out how to curb my drinking, but I can't, like I said, I can't handle not being, I can't be sober in my own skin. So the drug use kind of ramps up. I start getting into pills, and I had a nickname for a little bit of time in law school of Foghorn Leghorn, because our first round of finals, I decided that I can't study without Adderall. So I go to this drug dealer and try to get Adderall. And he's out of Adderall, but he has Valium. And so I'm like, all right, I'll just take that, which complete opposite effect. And I remember we're studying and I'm trying to answer a question. And I'm just like, I say, not guilty. And so they start calling me Foghorn Leghorn, and that's just the way that I was like. And so fast forward a little bit, we're at this concert. I've already conned a psychiatrist into prescribing me, Adderall for ADD and then Xanax for my anxiety. And of course I'm abusing the crap out of both of them, and drink a bunch of liquor on the way to this concert and just get out of control. We get into a big argument. She leaves me at this concert. I've got like no transportation, no phone, no wallet or anything. And I'm after a long journey, I make it back home. She's left. This is in Atlanta. She's left and gone to Birmingham to get away from me. And that's just how bad it had gotten. And she told me, if you ever drink again, this is over. So, I took it to heart and I stopped drinking. That was in October of 2008. And I didn't drink until May of 2009. But that whole time I'm smoking weed constantly, eating as many pills as I can to kind of, and I hid all my pills in my suits. So if you went in my closet and just brushed your hand along the clothes, you would just hear rattling, so I kept all my suits in like the guest room closet so she couldn't hear it. But then eventually, I had to have a drink. And so I filed for divorce and moved out, and started drinking the way that I wanted to. And that's just what I had to do. And it's, that was a conscious decision to, instead of work on that marriage, I was like, I have to drink. I can't do this. So we get divorced, and then my alcoholism just ramps up, constantly, that progressive part of it. I'm doing way more drugs than I ever did. I'm drinking to the point of, throwing up and passing out, every single night. And, what I ended up doing was trying to get sober. This is a weird story, but my drug dealer at the time, him and I were good friends, and he took me to my first AA meeting, which was kind of weird. And that was the first time I said I'm an alcoholic, and because he kind of saw the writing on the wall too. And I go home and I have this half bottle of wine, and I'm just staring at it, and I lose the staring contest, drink the wine, go on another bender for a week, come back and say, I tried to stop and I literally couldn't. Like, that was the first time I truly tried to not do anything, and I just couldn't do it. And so this wonderful guy, Fred, he said, all right, I'm going to be your sponsor. Here's a big book. Read the first 164 pages and call me every day and go to a meeting every day. And so I read the first 164 pages. I went to a meeting every single day. I used to go to the Triangle Club in Atlanta every night, the 10 o'clock meeting, where good sobriety is, at the late night meeting, where you sit in the back. And, I thought everybody was stuck up because they wouldn't talk to me. But the reality was I'd show up late, leave early. And if you looked at me, I ran the other way because I was so full of fear. And I didn't utilize that sponsor at all. Like, I called him for a little bit and then stopped calling him. And how that looked to me was, one night and of course I'm dating this active alcoholic, and we're having a party at my house where everybody's drinking. I'm just sober and miserable. And my friend, the drug dealer, comes over, and we ended up, doing cocaine, and I got away with it. Like, my girlfriend didn't know I did it. And I was like, this is it. Like, I just won't drink, but I'll do drugs, because there's no drugs in the big book, unless you read Bill's story or Dr. Bob's Nightmare. But, that's the beauty of going through the book with a sponsor, is, they point that stuff out to you. But at the time I didn't know that, like when I picked up my first 6-month chip, I remember I was late to the meeting because I was waiting on my drug dealer. And then I argue with him about making me late to the meeting. And he's like, "You're not sober, you're buying drugs." I'm like, "You're the one drinking." Like, I haven't had a drink in 6 months. And that's just the insanity of what I'm doing. And then, but of course, after an amount of time, I remember it was around the bar exam. I think it was after the bar exam, which I didn't pass the first time. And now I know, like, because I didn't study. Like when I studied, I just partied. And like the night before, I thought it'd be a good idea to eat mushrooms to calm down. And they lasted way longer than I anticipated. But so, it all comes back around to alcohol. And so I remember I come home I'm living in this building in downtown Atlanta, and they had this wine and cheese event. And I just go to say hey to some neighbors. Somebody hands me a glass of wine. I don't even think about it, and I'm drinking it. And then off to the races. I immediately go to the liquor store, start drinking, and doing my thing. And during this time, I am, my friend group has left. Like I have no friends left that aren't, drug dealers, bartenders, or strippers. Like that's, and the correlation there is you pay money to spend time with these people. I don't have any true friends anymore that I'm not using with. And I remember I got a job. It was actually my dream job as a prosecutor. That's what I wanted to do. Well, backing up, I went to Alabama for film school, but fear kept me from completing a film degree because I was afraid I would fail at it. And so law school was my backup. And when I was in college, I interned at the DA's office, and that's where I sort of felt like that would be my calling, is to be a prosecutor, help victims. And looking back, the main reason I wanted to do that and be in public service is because I felt so bad about myself. I was like, at least I can do something that's good, something that helps people. It's like that's all I got left, right? That's the only redeemable thing in my life, is that I'm trying to help people. And so I get this job as a prosecutor, and like I said, it was at the time my dream job, and I went a couple of trials, and I remember my boss calls me in and says, "Hey, I think he's going to give me some kind of like an award or a promotion or something, and he sits me down. He's like, "So you've been doing cocaine?" And I'm like, and I just was caught off guard, and I was honest really for the first time, where I just said, "Not today." That was like the only thing I could say. And he gives me a second chance and says, "We're going to keep you on, but we're going to drug test you. And if you mess up, or, if we ask you for a drug test and you don't do it, then you're fired," and all this stuff. And so, and I have no idea. I'm so messed up during this time. I don't really know what the timeline is, but during this, when I get the job at the DA's office, I knew I had to pass a drug test. So I stopped doing drugs for a little while, passed the first drug test. And then, when I drink, I can't control what I do. And I just keep, doing drugs. And when that happened, and he told me I couldn't, if I failed a drug test, I would be fired. At this point, I'm going to like NA and AA, trying to figure out, am I an alcoholic? Am I a drug addict? Because God forbid I can't cut out all of it, just, one or the other. And so I'm like, okay, well, drugs will get me in trouble, so I'll just drink. But the problem is, when I drink, I can't control what I do. I can't control how much I'm going to drink. I can't control what I ingest. And my MO is, I take one sip of alcohol, I'm looking for cocaine to keep the ball rolling, because I want to, and it's because I want to drink more. I want to keep drinking. And that allows me to do that. And I held out for just a little bit. I don't even remember how long it was. But I was at a friend's birthday at this bar that I went to all the time. And mind you, this is a bar where I used to go, and like the progression, I lived an hour away from where I worked, and I would go home, and then I'd usually go to this bar to have like a beer and, a burger or something. I always drank way too much, and then ended up at shadier places. And then eventually I just went straight from work to the bar. I never even made it home. So I'm at this bar just to celebrate my friend's birthday. We get really drunk. We go to another bar where somebody offers us, cocaine because it's his birthday. And I wasn't raised to turn down free drugs. So I take it. And I remember looking back, this is the first time that I truly felt powerless. And I had this cognizant moment where I'm looking down and I'm like, if I do this, it could ruin everything. Like I could get in trouble, I could lose my job. That's my identity at this point. But I have to do it because it's here. And so I did it. And the next day I get popped with a drug test. And I remember I just kept thinking, because I got out of so much trouble growing up with just all these close calls, and, I just felt invincible. And I was like, well, there's no way that I'm going to fail this drug test. I could go get one of those, detox things. My drug test, my urine test looks like it's, glowing in the dark. And I just look at the nurse. I'm like, I drink a lot of Gatorade. I don't know what to tell you. And that day I go and I pick up a white chip. And I'd been picking up white chip after white chip at this clubhouse. When I moved out of that place I was living in, I found a whole bag of white chips. And this guy, this is how, my higher power intervened. This guy, Patrick, who, I love to death, and he ended up relapsing and passed away because of this disease. He cornered me out in the parking lot. He had seen me pick up a bunch of white chips, and, he asked me if I had a sponsor, and I told him no. And he's like, well, I sponsor. And I'm like, that's great. Can you get my money so I can go to my car? And then I was just like, all right, look, we be my sponsor. And I just had that little window of willingness, and it's like, I'm so grateful for that. And what he did was, he took me to meetings every single day, and he introduced me to people. He took me to my first home group. My first real home group was this group called Fifth Tradition in Atlanta. And they're really big on service work. And so I started, setting up the meetings and tearing down the meetings, and we would go out to dinner after the meetings, and he'd make me go. And, how funny my memory is. I thought, looking back, that like I was super shy, didn't say a word, and I just was very timid. And I remember telling that story, and there's this older guy that was just like, you wouldn't shut the hell up, like we just wanted you to be quiet. But what that did was, and during this time I'm going to treatment, because I failed the drug test. I have to report to the state bar that I've, been fired, and I need to go into treatment for cocaine and alcohol use. And so I'm not able to practice law for a while. And they, for some reason, don't like it when you prosecute and do a lot of drugs at the same time. It's a weird hypocrisy, I guess. But so I, have no job. I'm in treatment. All I'm doing is recovery. And I'm grateful for that, because, this program that I work, the 12 steps, it's not about how I feel about them. It's just about working them. Because, when I went to treatment and then started working with the sponsor, and with Patrick was great. But he was one of those guys that's just like, we'll take the steps eventually, let's just get you kind of stable or whatever. And I kept hearing all these people talk about, I took the steps and I felt great. I took the steps and I had this relief, and it was about 30 days in, and I was like, I'm dying. And at this point, that white chip was November 30th of 2010. So I went to my home group, and there was this lawyer there, and I was like, my ego is like, I've got to have a lawyer be my sponsor, because only a lawyer could understand a lawyer, which is, looking back, so dumb. But that was my ego, and that was, my identity. And that lawyer wasn't at the meeting that night. And this guy, Robert B, was speaking, and, the way he talked about sponsorship and what he was talking about, how it was, I could not relate that to the man I knew. And I was like, something happened with him, and I can believe that, and I can get down with that. And they talk about, get a sponsor that has what you want. And one of my biggest problems, and this my first 8 years in the program, looking back, this is one of my biggest hindrances, is that I looked at, when I heard people's stories and I looked at, have what you want, I looked at external things, like, oh, they got their job back, they got the wife, the house, the car, whatever. But Robert, he just seemed happy. And I didn't know what that was like, to actually be truly happy. The only laughing I did was when I was high or drunk. So I asked him to be my sponsor, and we went through the steps, and I did it to the very best of my ability. And I didn't do any of that at the time because I wanted to have this spiritual experience. I did it because I wanted my job back. I had this crazy notion that, like, I would get my ex-wife back, and that's what I wanted. I wanted this life back. And I'm so grateful that I didn't get all those things back immediately. But because I worked those steps as honestly as I could, even though my motives were wrong, I had that spiritual awakening. And I remember one morning, I was driving to treatment. I was an outpatient. I was supposed to be there for 30 days. And they kept me for like over 90 because I was a knucklehead, I guess. Like I remember I would show up in suits, like, and my best friend, when he talks, Yona, he is one of my best friends today. And he always talks about how, like, he thought I was such a douchebag because I would come to meetings in suits and, like, be like, I'm a lawyer. And it's like, well, not really. I can't practice and I don't have a job. But, in treatment, at rehab, they actually banned me from wearing suits. I was like, well, I'm trying to dress for success. And I want to be successful at this, but they're like, it's just a mask. But that's just, where my ego was at the time. But I had this moment where I'm driving to treatment, and the ironic part was where this treatment center was. It was actually on the way to it. I had to pass my drug dealer that I used to go to every single day. And the ironic part is, like, this is in Dunwoody, which is like north of Atlanta, and I was working in Noonan at the time, like before I got sober, and 5 o'clock traffic. I would drive 2 hours in traffic, be perfectly fine with it because I know I'm going to get drugs. And to this day, still, like, I'll bitch about having to drive 15 minutes to a meeting. It's just the way that this thing works. It's, I feel that relief when I'm on the way to the liquor store or on the way to the bar or on the way to, a dealer. But psychologically, like, even though intellectually I know for a fact if I go to a meeting or I call another alcoholic, I'm going to feel better, or I do some service work or work with a sponsee, I'm going to feel better. But going into it, I'm always like, this isn't going to work. Like, this is, ridiculous. But again, it's not about how I feel. It's about what I do. And that's kind of the biggest takeaway I've gotten out of this program. But I'm driving to treatment. And when I get there, I realized I didn't have the radio on in the car. I didn't have the TV on when I was getting ready. And that was the first time that I, like, experienced true serenity and peace. And I was like, this is what it's all about. Like, this is what everybody keeps talking about, and I was hooked at that point. And I was like, this is what I want. I want that serenity and peace, because I'm tired of, the voices in my head and the uncomfortable feelings and just being miserable all the time. And so, and that was a direct result of working the steps. I was in constant service in my home group. And I remember, early on, there was another guy that kind of got sober around the same time I did. And he was at a treatment center, like an inpatient treatment center. And my sponsor would have me take him to meetings. And that was the way that I was able to be of service early on before I could sponsor. And I tell guys that now, like, you can be of service and do 12-step work without taking someone through the steps. It's as easy as giving somebody a ride, or giving them a call and seeing how they're doing. And that was the biggest problem with me. And it still is to this day, is calling other alcoholics, just to see how they're doing. Cause I'm like, I'm busy. I know they're busy. They don't want to hear from me. But most of the time it's, it's a relief. Like, when other people call me, 5-minute conversation, I'm out of my head and I feel so much better. No matter really what the subject matter is. So at this point, I can't practice law. And my first sober job, it was kind of funny. I was working the counter at a salon. And it was, total ego crushing work for me. And I'm so grateful for that. And I remember at around this time, we had a speaker come in, Don M. from Louisville, Kentucky, who was an attorney and had lost his license and got it back. And, again, like I'm saying, I'm doing all this stuff so I can get that job back. And what he tells me during this time is my first year of sobriety. He's like, if you make sobriety your goal, everything else will work out. It may not work out the way you want it to, but it's going to work out. He's like, but if you make practicing law your goal, you may get back there, but you're going to lose it all because you're going to put that above everything else. And I kept that as my motivating factor for a long time. But looking back, I still had reservations about that because, 3 years later, I'm able to practice law again. And I end up, during this time, my grand sponsor owned a tattoo shop, and he offered to let me learn how to tattoo and learn a trade because I didn't think I'd ever practice law again. And then when I got the call and I was able to practice, I ended up leaving that apprenticeship. And I'm grateful to him. Like, he was huge in my early sobriety, gave me that shot, in that profession. And when I left his shop, we had kind of a falling out, and then thankfully we were able to reconcile before he passed away, and he ended up, going back out. And it's interesting when you hear people's stories. It's kind of the same thing. People that stay sober, they're doing the same things. They're working the steps, they're working with others, they're in service, they have a home group generally, and they pray, and they try to enlarge their spiritual life. And the ones that don't are the ones that quit doing at least one of those things. And I got really distracted with the whole service work thing, and the surface, I looked like a great AA, but when I relapsed after 8 years, it's because I wasn't praying, I wasn't enlarging my spiritual life. But anyway, so 3 years in, I'm able to practice law again. I go and make amends to my boss. It took me 3 years to be able to do that. Like, that was my last amends that I was holding on to. And he told me the best way to make amends is to come back and do a good job. And that was like, I couldn't believe that at all. Like, he truly, believed in me. And so I went back and started practicing again. And looking back, man, my ego just like went through the roof once I got my license, my law license. And, and that became my life. I remember that was down in Newnan. My home group was in Atlanta. I moved down to Newnan to be closer to my work. And I still went to my home group we met 3 times a week, and we'd go to a treatment center and we had a big book study, and then a speaker meeting, which is kind of what we modeled my current home group, Wicked Soba, after, with like a speaker meeting that has 2 speakers, a 15-minute and then a 50-minute. But, I was GSR during that time, but looking back, like, I just totally isolated myself. Because of the nature of being a prosecutor, my boss asked me not to go to meetings where I worked because I'd run into people I'm prosecuting. And so that sort of limited me as far as local meetings. And I realized the importance of being close to my home group and close to my network. I need to be able to like call somebody up and go grab a cup of coffee if I need to. Or if somebody needs me to, come meet with them or meet them at a meeting or something, I need to be able to be available. And looking back, I see how that sort of affected it. So I get this job, then, I meet love of my life, number 2, who's also an attorney. And, on paper, I'm like, this is perfect. I remember we were arguing over, she was a defense attorney and I was the prosecutor, and we were arguing over a bond, and she threatened to cut me. And I was like, I love you. Like, we need to get married. And we just immediately, like, 3 months in, we move in together. And then, like, before we're even together a year, we're married. And, I get like the little wannabe sports car, and we have this, condo in Midtown Atlanta, and just, living the dream. And that becomes my obsession. And, I change jobs, and I keep, moving up as far as like my role in the offices that I'm working in, and I become obsessed with that. And, I lose touch with praying, with, talking to my sponsor. I quit talking to my sponsor on a regular basis. I remember thinking, I can call him about this issue, but I know what he's going to say, so there's no point. And it's like, not realizing a lot of times it's just voicing what's in your head to get it out of there. And now I know, like, I'm a sick alcoholic and I need somebody to tell me that I'm an idiot. I know it intellectually, but I need somebody to tell me sometimes in my face. And so, I ended up changing home groups to be closer to where I was living. And looking back, I thought it was to be closer, but really it was so I could say that I had a home group, but I could go to a group that didn't know me as well. I could sort of sit in the back and not be as involved. And so people wouldn't really know what was going on with me, because that's the importance of a home group to me is, one, you have a place that's like, and David, my current sponsor, says this a lot. It's like your AA address. There needs to be a place that you go to regularly where if people need to find you, they can. And a place where, you're always available. So during this time, my wife had gone to, it was actually kind of funny. She went to a conference in Colorado. It was a prosecutors conference, and came back with gummies. And this is before, like, they were everywhere. I don't know how they are in Tennessee, but they're everywhere in Georgia now. But this is before you can get those. And she brought them back, and she was out of town one weekend, and I just was like, I'm going to try this. Because one, it's like, this is new, and I've never experienced this. This is now with like all the flavored liquor and stuff. Like, we just had the straight stuff back when I was drinking. But so I try it, and I get high, and nothing bad happens, which is the worst thing that can happen to an alcoholic like me, because then I just, convince myself, like, and how that started actually was, like, I started taking CBD to, like, deal with my anxiety instead of, like, utilizing the steps in the program, and convince myself, like, I need this so that I can be okay. And I'm still going to meetings, like chairing meetings and still speaking at meetings. And I'm actually sponsoring people. Like, one of my best friends down here, he was one of my sponsees at the time. He didn't stay sober. And I ended up making him and let him know that I wasn't sober. But so within a week of taking that gummy, I'm, smoking weed and doing eating mushrooms and everything natural, of course, like nothing bad like cocaine anymore, but I'm just high 24/7. And, my marriage is failing. I'm miserable at home. And I think that this is the only solution, is to get high and go to meetings, which is pure insanity after 8 years of, like, working the program, sponsoring people, and doing the deal. But I lost sight of that, enlarging your spiritual life. So I ended up, my wife actually caught me, and, she made me call my sponsor right then, which I'm so grateful for. Called and picked up a white chip, and, rededicated myself. Like, I had a lot of ego of, like, well, I didn't drink, but I wasn't sober. And, but it was great because I got to really help a lot of people along the way that felt the same way I did. And now that, marijuana is becoming a lot more, it's legal and more accepted. A lot of people I've found in the programs are kind of struggling with that. And what I've found is that if I'm changing the way I think and feel, I'm not sober. That's just been my experience. And so after rededicating myself to the program, like, I dove back into it, and really, on top of making sure I always have a home group, trying to sponsor people. I'm sponsorable, try to be. I fail at that often. But the most important thing to me now is, in the big book, when it gives you instructions on how to tell your story, right? There's a couple of different ones. One of them is, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. But the other part, which I think is at the end of There's a Solution, is we tell in our own ways how we came to have a relationship with God. And that's the most important thing to me. And it's important because, like I said, I grew up ultra religious, to the point where, like, I wasn't evangelical, and I felt bad about it. I had a lot of guilt about that because, like, I had my girlfriend at the time was Catholic, and one of my best friends was Jewish. And I'm like, man, it sucks they're going to hell because they're not Baptist. But, that's just how it is. But now, I say God when I talk about my higher power because it's just easier and less syllables, and I'm lazy. Because my idea of a higher power is something completely different than, the Christian God that I grew up with. But what I love about the program and the traditions, which I'm grateful I had a sponsor that took me through the traditions and really taught me about why we have these, which especially, in the last several years, like not having to talk about what's going on in politics has been beautiful. I have so many friends in the program. They're like my best friends that we would not be friends if we had to talk about politics. But we share this common bond, this common peril of alcoholism. And that's what we focus on. And the beauty of the program for me and really trying to live a life that's principled and is at my higher power's will, which to me, the prayers that I do like a lot of meditation, like transcendental meditation and things like that. But what I always pray is those prayers in the book of, give me knowledge of your will and how to carry and the courage to carry that out. And, the fear prayer every single day, because I'm still just full of fear constantly. Remove my fears and direct my attention to what you would have me be. And then, to me, one of the lines that always sticks out in the big book is we're supposed to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and our fellows. And I pray every day for the ability to do that and the opportunity to do that. Because I truly believe that my purpose on this life is just to be of service. And I'm grateful that, like I talked about, being a lawyer was my identity for the longest time. Now I'm so grateful that, my identity is being a good husband. Like I'm married now. We just celebrated 3 years. Marriage number 3, hopefully, third and final, third time's the charm. But, what's beautiful is that we have such an open communication in our marriage. Like we talk a lot about our exes. And, I talk a lot about my ex-wives. And the reason that I do that is I learned so much about how not to act in a marriage. And I learned from all those mistakes. And the beauty of this program, when it talks about we don't regret the past nor wish, I'm paraphrasing, but we don't regret the past or wish to ignore it. For me, what that means is, I have a lot of mistakes, but I don't have to regret them if I can learn from them. If I turn those into learning examples, and I was just telling a sponsee this the other day, he was going through something really, really rough. And I said, the one thing that gets me through a lot of rough spots in my life now in sobriety, because sobriety is not all, sunshine and puppies and rainbows,
Nope.
is that if you get through it with a little bit of grace and dignity and stay sober through that, that gives you the tools to help so many other people. And that's the beauty of it. Like I said, going through the book with a sponsor is what changed my life. And I remember he pointed out in Bill's story when it talks about, the wife gets sick, the mother-in-law gets sick, they lose the house. He said, those are all circumstances of life. Life is going to happen whether, you're sober or not. But if you're sober and a principled person in the program, it works out so much better. And I'm so grateful that I'm no longer in the results business. I'm just showing up, trying to do the best I can. If I was a little bit better than I was yesterday, then great. And that's the bar I set for myself. And it makes me so much more happier than trying to control everyone and everything around me.
Yeah. No, man, you shared a lot of experience and important stuff. Something you mentioned, I wanted to see if you could expand on a little bit. You said transcendental dental. I'm going to mispronounce this, so don't laugh at me, people. Meditation. So, will you explain to the audience and this guy too? But what you mean by that?
Yeah. So what's funny is I got into meditation during my first marriage when I thought I had an anger problem and not an alcohol problem. And so I started studying things like Buddhism and things about just accepting things the way they are, which is, what we learn in the program. And used to do a lot of mindfulness meditation where you just focus on your breathing. And that's kind of what you concentrate on and try to push out intrusive thoughts. Transcendental meditation is just where you get a mantra, which is just something that you repeat over and over again in your head. Sit for 20 minutes and just repeat that. And so you focus on that mantra and your breathing, and it sort of pushes out all the other thoughts. And that's something I've been working at for a while. I'm not perfect at it, and I don't, I try to do it every day. Obviously there's days I miss it. Try to do it twice a day. But that's just part of my spiritual practice, because when I do that, it just gives me a little bit of reprieve, cuts out all the noise of what's going on, and that is what kind of opens me up to, like, after I do that, then I do some readings. And it just sort of lets me get in that headspace where I'm more teachable and I'm more receptive to, like, what my higher power wants from me that day.
And that's awesome. And thank you for explaining that, Trey. I'm not going to try to pronounce the word again.
Well, I would say just call it. A lot of people call it TM, but I'm a child, so I always think of BM, and so it's.
Yep, me and you get along just fine, Trey. Just fine. Something else you mentioned reminded me of an old guy, Tom, used to say, when you have successes in recovery, he was real old school. He always said, get you some index cards and write down on the index cards, hey, this happened to me. I went through it. This is what I did, and I didn't drink. And just kind of little reminders of some of the stuff we go through, that we don't have to drink over or do drugs or anything, which is pretty cool. You just reminded me of that, so I had to mention it.
It's a beautiful thing to be able to experience life and be fully present. Like, for example, before I got sober, my uncle, who I was super close with, he died of cancer, of lung cancer. And the last year that he was alive, like, I saw him one time because I was too selfish to, like, be there for him, because it hurt me too much to see him that way. And so how I use that experience now when I'm sober, and I finally learned that it's not about what you say, it's just about showing up. And so, my grandmother's husband just passed away recently, and I was able to show up for her. And, I've committed, like, today, it's a Wednesday lunch date. I take my Nana out for lunch every Wednesday, and, I'm able to be there for her. And that's one of the things I learned, is just how to show up, because I couldn't do that before. I just ran and hid and drank.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. Is there anything else we didn't cover that you'd like to share, Trey?
I don't think so. I feel like I've rambled for a long time. I think that the biggest takeaway for me is, I found out that I used to compare myself to other alcoholics and wish that I could be that guy that went to, like, a meeting a week, didn't sponsor anybody, didn't have to do anything. And I quickly learned, after that 8 years and going back out, is that, I'm a sick alcoholic. And so I've got to do everything in the program. And that's, not just the service work and helping others, but perfecting and enlarging my spiritual life, and that meditation stuff and the prayers and the things I read are all part of that. Because if I'm not connected with my higher power, the rest of it's going to go out the window. And that's kind of like what anchors me in to do everything else effectively.
Yeah. Well said. Well, I can't let you go without our rapid fire questions. So if you are ready, Trey, we will do it. We will do it. Trey was very stressed out. No, he really wasn't. I'm just joking when I say that. All right. So what is your favorite recovery slogan?
Favorite recovery slogan? I have to say, let go and let God, which I used to hate with a passion. But it's just, to me now, what that means is just, things are going to happen, and it's going to work out. It may not work out the way I want it to, but it's going to work out if I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah. What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Meeting makers make it.
What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
Sobriety superpower?
Mhm.
Knowing that I don't know anything.
If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Easy does it.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
Lou Reed, That Magic Moment.
Nice. If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
Oh, to pick up the phone more.
What step do you love the most?
10th step and 11th step. Those are the
What
things
step?
that really keep me.
Oh, yeah.
10 and 11,
Yeah.
just because I feel like they go hand in hand. Like 10 helps me throughout the day, and the 11th step really helps me start the day and end the day correctly. So if I stay in those, I'm usually pretty good.
What step do you love the least?
I would have to say the 4th step, because I hate work and I'm lazy, so I don't want to. I don't want to write inventories.
Fair enough. What is one of your favorite movies?
Oh gosh, Blue Velvet by David Lynch.
Yeah. And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I'd really want him to say, "Welcome to the Thunderdome."
Nice. Trey, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience, strength, and hope.
Thanks
Really
for having me.
appreciate it.
It's a blessing to be of service. Thank you.
A new episode is released every Thursday at noon. You can listen to the show on your favorite podcast apps, Amazon Audio, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." Please follow, like, subscribe, and share because someone out there needs to hear this today. Thank you, Trey.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That was fun.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience, strength, and hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to The Cup of Joe Show.